necessarily was willing to sacrifice and make sure that less people died, that less civilians died, that less of your children died within a battle. I think the average person understands that you had to make a tough decision that they themselves likely would have made. That's the reason that you're still the leader of that necessary nation. I think that's pretty important, right? But they go, and secondly, they go, extremists get more powerful. Look, I'm unsure why they don't go extreme on either side of the debate, was never comparatively analyzed. But the thing is, though, they now get more empowered because they believe the average person is likely to support them. They get more extreme because they have more legitimacy, versus on the comparative, they think before they act. So they don't necessarily go as extreme, they don't kill as many people, and they don't leave things as bad. That's why those groups aren't as harmful on our side. Look, characterizing what our occupiers look like, because I think it's missing from the top half clash. I think they look like the fact that the army was incredibly powerful enough to defeat your army. Now, that's incredibly important because I'm unsure why necessarily any desperate group is likely to be effective, right? But look, I think that most countries gave up a lot of their colonies after post-World War II. It's the thing that they're likely to be sanctioned or likely to suffer economic harms to the point that they still do things like colonialism. But look, I think that often means, though, and this is an important characterization, that those nations have an iron grip upon those countries, that those occupiers are incredibly powerful, incredibly difficult to remove from power. But for 50, I think it's the fact that they often just put things, individuals within that and cooperate with them, necessarily don't have connections to these resistance groups, because not the politician necessarily who is in power isn't directly attached to that resistance group, that doesn't engage in those attacks on those nations. Okay, within that, the 3 points I spoke about. What does cooperation look like? Two things. I think it looks like giving support, right? I think it looks like publicly backing them as if they were a good actor. And the reason that this is important, right? And the reason that this means you've leveraged to get good things out of the occupier is because they want stability, right? And I think that the reason that they want stability is often that it's a political reason. It's far easier for them to necessarily occupy that land at the point where it's stable and they can meaningfully engage in it. But secondly, I think it's passing on information, right? Because look, at the point that they're willing to engage, I think it shows good faith. I think it's things like resources where they have no prior knowledge. But the reason that this is important, right, is two things. One, I think it looks like long-term cooperation, right? Because as more and more cooperation engages with that occupier, I think that means it creates trust. It means that there's goodwill and good faith there, because to a reasonable extent, you're fulfilling the promises that you want. You're fulfilling that reciprocal burden. That means that it's likely to engage in long-term trust. What does that look like? I think that looks like the parliament in Catalonia or French Guinea, right? And the reason that's important, though, is it looks like more autonomy over your local decisions. The fact that individuals have some degree of freedom, right? Because I don't think any team in this debate solves absolute freedom, right? Not even OO's attempts at it, right? But it's the degrees of which you have freedom, because there's no thing of absolute freedom. It's the degrees to which you get that, and that happens on our side. But secondly, it's goodwill, right? Because they're willing to engage in good faith right now. But it's the fact that if you actively and this is important, right? Because I think it looks like them ruling by improving your quality of life. I think it's the fact that they're willing to improve your quality of life because they identify that they're willing to rule through goodwill. What happens on the comparative? You as the leader who represents most individuals within this country actively promote tax upon them, actively want to riot against them per OG, and I think that means that they're less likely to engage with you in the future. They're likely to rule in terror, and I think that means that the inverse of what I just said is likely to happen. How do occupiers react on prop? One, I think they crack down. It looks like locking people up. It looks like limiting civil rights. And the reason they do this is they need a deterrent. They need a deterrent for the future so you never rise up. And the reason that's stability, and so that you never rise up. Right? And I think that just means that they crack down as hard as possible. But secondly, I think they're never willing to engage, right? Because of the fact that it makes them look weak. It makes them look weak necessarily within the general population within that. But look, I also think that means, thirdly, it looks like them cracking down on civil liberties, right? It looks like them banning certain social media. It looks like them banning the fact that you can have public, free access to public speech and things like that. But fourthly, I think it's replacement, right? Because in status quo, they often put locals or people who represent you in a parliament or a position of power because they want local legitimacy so that their rule doesn't have to necessarily use the army. But look, I think this on the comparative what happens. I think now you're linked to resistant movements. I think they want a very, very pro-occupying government, and they're less likely to engage with you. You're less likely to get individuals who actually understand the lived experiences of individuals on the ground. And thirdly, on economic stability. Look, on prop riots, cutting supply chains are incredibly bad for three reasons. One, businesses are disrupted. The ability for businesses to grow, to sell products, for people to access goods and services is significantly reduced. That means businesses are less able to grow. Secondly, it looks like less aids and grants, because at the point where a state is actively cracking down instead of cooperating with individuals, it looks like them getting less international aid and less international support to access them. But look, and less like grants for foreign direct investment. But thirdly, I think it's FDI, right? Because now on the comparative, that individuals don't want to invest in businesses. In status quo, the investment in Hong Kong in the last 3 years has dramatically dropped. And the reason that has dramatically dropped is because it's instability. When you invest in Hong Kong now, you do not know whether your investment is safe, because people can riot for weeks upon end and there's no guarantee on return investment. You're risk averse and you're unwilling to go in. But what happens now is the fact that now you have that economic freedom. But look, I also just think that that's important, right? Because of the fact that now we have the active harm, and the reason we beat OO is because we have the active harm of crackdown, right? It's the fact that they're willing to crack down on you more aggressively, and that looks like and that is better than possible freedom, right? Because I think the probabilistic and realistic characterization is that is more tangible. But look, why is this important, right? Because I think that the economic freedom is incredibly important, right? Economic freedom means you have the ability to assert yourself within society. It means you've better access to education. It means you've better access to resources that can improve your quality of life. I think it just means that the average income and the average wealth of the individuals within that country is likely to go up. For all of those reasons, beg you to